Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the program. It's a CLE titled Hiring Your First Employee, presented by the Bar Association's Solo Practitioner and Small Firm Committee, as well as the Barristers Solo and Small Committee. My name is Matt Gluck. I'm the section chair for the Bar Association's Solo Practitioner and Small Firm Committee. I've got a sole litigation practice here in San Francisco. I focus on business disputes and homeowners association disputes. I was originally going to act as a moderator for this panel, but these panelists are so qualified and so well prepared that my services aren't really necessary in that regard. So I'm just going to make the introductions and get out of the way until the question portion of the presentation. Immediately to my left is Diana Mayer. Mayer, sorry, of the law offices of Diana Mayer. She, after graduating Stanford Law School in 1998, Diana spent 5 years at the Santa Clara Public Defender's Office, beginning and ending her days in the courtroom. Then in 2003, she began practicing employment law and joined the prestigious San Francisco firm now known as Bushnell and Kaplan LLP. She opened her Marin County solo practice in 2008, focusing on defense side preventative employment work as well as privacy law. Diana also works as in-house counsel for a number of small and large organizations, including Quantum Corporation of San Jose, where she is senior counsel for privacy law and labor and employment. Diana also investigates workplace complaints in English and in Spanish, and teaches and writes legal advice articles on a variety of legal topics. She's been widely published in national and state periodicals, including the Recorder, the ABA's Experience, and her own employment and privacy law journal. Next to Diana is Angel Lewis. Angel is the founder of the law office of Angel L. Lewis, an employment law, HR consulting, and mediation firm. Angel is based out of Oakland, but works for or works with clients throughout California in counseling on employment law and HR issues, as well as representing her clients in labor and employment litigation matters. The mission of Angel's firm is to advise and counsel her clients to become employers of choice. Angel helps her clients being proactive in establishing policies, procedures, and practices that optimize her employee engagement and productivity while minimizing the risk of employment-related claims. Her motto is, don't just call me when you have a problem, call me when you need to make a business decision that will impact your employees. So we've got the employment law specialists immediately next to me. At the end is Otis Landerholm. He's an immigration attorney with a lot of experience doing it, hiring employees. Otis is the founding attorney of Landerholm Immigration, a growing firm dedicated to fighting for the rights of immigrants who are facing deportation. He runs an office in the Mission District here in San Francisco, as well as his main office in downtown Oakland, where he manages a staff of 5. Before practicing law, Otis was a world traveler and a language student. Otis speaks Spanish as well as Mandarin Chinese, and he lived all over the world, including Spain, Argentina, Japan, China, and Ecuador. He's got 2 bachelor's degrees in philosophy and linguistics from Washington State, and he's a graduate of Golden Gate University Law School here in San Francisco. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to our speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is that good? So we're just gonna hop right into our PowerPoint presentation. We're gonna talk first about what we're gonna cover during the course of our conversation here. I actually wanted to take a bit of a poll. How many of you are solo practitioners currently? How many of you already have employees? Okay. So what we're going to talk about today will help everyone, those who have already had some experience hiring people, as well as folks that are thinking about hiring people. So what we're going to cover today, initially, we're going to talk about just preliminary considerations, and these are business strategy considerations that are beyond just the compliance issues for your company, but also thinking long-term and short-term, what makes the most sense for you to further advance the mission of your company, and whether that's hiring an individual or bring on someone in on a contract or consulting basis. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Diana's going to hop into the contractor versus employee classifications. She's also going to discuss the "So you are an employer, now what?" section, and I'll be talking a little bit about some additional strategic things to consider in that process. So you're an employer, now what? How do you continue to build on the foundation for your business? Diana's also going to discuss the top 5 things every employer should do. I'm going to talk a little bit about payroll and benefits, basically in-house versus outsourcing. And then Otis is going to give us basically our case study for today on his own process for hiring his employees and how he's been able to sort of meld both the legal compliance piece along with the business strategy piece of operating a law firm. And then hopefully we'll be very timely and give you guys a lot of time to ask us questions specific to your industry. So just to jump right into, sorry, a little slow on this.
Is it working?
Yes. We're at the preliminary considerations slide. And so essentially, a lot of times, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who are solo entrepreneurs, and we as solo practitioners and folks that were previously solo practitioners, at the heart of it, we're entrepreneurs. And so in starting a business, you may have felt like, I need to make money. You did what you needed to do to get your practice up and going, but you didn't necessarily think long-term goals. You didn't necessarily think about the mission, vision, and values of your business. And so, as attorneys, we have the opportunity to disrupt the market we're in. We've had a lot of hierarchy in our industry, and just a lot of things that we could definitely serve to advance not only the missions for our businesses, but for the legal industry as a whole. And so, like I said, the mission, vision, and values is about more than making money. So as he introduced me today, he said, my mission for my practice is to advise and counsel my clients on becoming employers of choice. So that's a long-term mission. Obviously, I want to make money doing that. But if I can serve a greater purpose other than just making money, when I go and bring someone into my business, I say, this is what we aim to do. And that gives the employee a purpose, something greater than just coming to work for a job and a paycheck. And as you get out there and you start to look to hire people, they're going to say, I need something more than just a paycheck. I need to feel challenged. You might find people that say, I just need a paycheck. So think about that. When you think about the mission, vision, and values, the purpose of that is not just to have these lofty ideas, but also to help you identify the best person to bring into your practice to achieve your business strategic goals. The vision for me is to be a subject matter expert in employment law and HR consulting. So again, you want to have something that you can always go back to in terms of growing your company and making decisions about hiring and how you set up processes and procedures in your company. And so values, the values for me, there are a lot of them, but certainly cost efficiency, being sustainable. When I started my practice, I was very focused on having a paperless practice to the extent that I could. So when you think about how organized you currently are in your practice or how disorganized you are in your current practice, those are the types of things that should inform who will be the best person to bring into your company. So that will mean, should I bring in a full-time person, a part-time person? Should I bring in someone that can just be a consultant and I can have them on call? Am I hiring a legal secretary, an attorney, a paralegal, an unlicensed attorney? What makes the most sense in my practice? Do I need someone that's the right-hand man or woman? Or do I just need someone to fill out forms and they have a pretty stagnant job where they kind of have rote tasks? And those things should also inform the appropriate individual to bring into your company. Do you need someone who is a taskmaster who can just fill out forms all day? Or do you want someone who's young and innovative and wants to help you build your practice and improve technological efficiencies and help to leverage your business in that fashion? So at the end of the day, those values and mission, vision, and values are going to help to inform you on how to go forward with your business. On the issue of recruitment and retention, and I'll speak to it a little bit later, but the whole purpose of setting out these areas is to be intentional, be purposeful. Two of the best things you can do as you take these next steps forward are to draft a job description. And in addition to that, draft interview questions. Even if you don't adhere to those things, it gives you a foundation that's going to help your practice later on. And I'll talk about that as we get further into it. Additionally, on the issue of legal compliance, yes, we can sit here and we can tell you all the steps you can take to be legally compliant in hiring an employee. But beyond the legal compliance, you also want to understand the costs and risks of a bad hire. And that includes everything from just the process of going through posting for the job again, maybe having your business disrupted while you're trying to figure out the next person to bring in. Onboarding that person, getting them up to speed to your job expectations and requirements, as well as training. So all of those things, when you say, okay, I can spend an hour doing this, think about what that means to your business. That's an hour of billable time that you could have been doing something else, or even doing business building as opposed to dealing with these administrative tasks to hire your employee. So next, Diane is going to talk about the contractor versus employee classification.
Thanks, Angel. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Mayer, an employment and privacy attorney. And I'm going to talk a little bit about contractors versus employees. I just wanted to see how many of you might consider or are considering the question of whether to hire someone on as opposed to contract with them, or have a contractor say and are thinking about whether you want to make them an employee. Okay, great. Okay, so I also, in your materials, I included an article I wrote on this topic for the Marin Bar Association, and it's just a little, it's a really brief article. If you're really interested in this topic, I have a much longer PowerPoint that I do for other attorneys that's like an hour and a half just on contractors versus employees, like how agencies find out, how they know to audit and things like that. I'm happy to send that to anyone who wants it. But this will give you kind of a tickler of things to look at when you start making the decision. So basically, there is not a real black and white when it comes to contractors versus employees. In fact, different agencies have different tests. So there's a Supreme Court case that's often cited. But if you're looking, for example, at administrative agencies, what the DLSE will say or the EDD will say or that kind of a thing, they use different tests. So they're slightly different. I would say the biggest thing that is common to all of these tests is who is in control. The more that you are in control, the more likely you have an employee as opposed to a contractor. To that end, I would say a couple of indicia I did not put on here, but I wanted to talk about in that vein is how much is this person really operating outside of your area of expertise? The person is supporting your business. If they are an admin person, for example, and they get direction from you and what they do directly relates to your business, they're really looking like an employee. As opposed to, say, you hire a painter to paint your new law office. And they come in, they give you a bid. They're not charging you by the hour. They're charging you by the job. And, for the life of you, if you tried to paint your office, maybe you could do, some of us could do more of a passable job than others, but most of us would not say that is something that we would really feel competent to do. So you can't stand behind the painter and say, you did this and you did that, and tell them how to do their job. At least most of us wouldn't try and do that. So that person's looking like a contractor. So one thing to think about is, if their area of expertise is very far afield of yours, you're only going to be able to exercise so much control over them. But basically, you want to think about, are they following your direction? If they are, they're much more likely to be an employee. Are they part-time? That has become a much more important test that the agencies seem to be looking at, especially in California, I would say. There's just something about, someone who works only for you, even if it's part-time, 20 hours a week, if you're there only, and I don't know if you are really the only place they go to get income, and maybe it's because, you're probably also the only place that they could ostensibly get Social Security paid in and EDD taxes paid and that kind of a thing, then you're looking a lot more like an employer. And of course, if they work only for you and they work 40 hours a week, then you're really looking like an employer. As opposed to, they work for you, but they have 3 or 4 other clients or a lot more than that. That is really going to help you say that this person's a contractor. And then does this person, lastly, hold him or herself out as a business? Some of the things that I look at when, for example, if I'm hiring someone to help me with my admin work, is do they have a website? Do they have a business card? Do they have insurance? Things that look like this person has really gone down this path of thinking about the fact that they're a business, that they're going to remain self-employed. If they have all those things, then they're more likely to be a contractor. And to that end, I would say, if any of you sort of decide you want to err in that direction, keep a file on the person, the things that make them look like a contractor. One thing I would also recommend is, and this is not definitive by any stretch of the imagination, but it can help. It can help a lot. If you do have someone and they maybe are really fall in this gray area, as a lot of people do, set up, and you want to make them a contractor, set up an agreement with them, a contract agreement. And in that agreement, establish some of the things that go into the test. The fact that you're not going to be looking over their shoulder every minute. The fact that they will set maybe the hours that they are going to work and when they're going to work and where they're going to work. And I would particularly put in there that they are going to pay taxes, that you're going to issue them a W-9 and they're going to pay taxes. Because if you think about when these agencies get involved, when they start micromanaging employer, employee, and contractor relationships, a lot of times it's when they're not getting their fees, their taxes, whatever it might be. Social Security tax, unemployment tax. So have it in there that this person is they're paying their taxes, and at least then you're avoiding any suggestion that you're defrauding the IRS. If it turns out you get the classification wrong. People sort of usually listen to this and then they say to me, all right, well, what should I do? Because it's not clear cut. And I say a lot of that depends on your tolerance for risk. If you're a person who the idea that someday, you could have an agency like the DLSE, breathing down your neck, wanting to audit all your records and so on because you have someone who's a contractor and they could possibly be an employee. If that idea is just horrific to you, then it's probably worth the investment to make the person an employee. But the good news is, of course, you avoid a lot of risk if you make the person an employee. And I would say that, far and away, courts and administrative agencies err on the side of finding that people are employees. So you have to be aware of that. So it's always a good idea to make someone an employee, unless, like I said, they're clearly not, because, say, their area of expertise is very far afield of yours, or they have many clients, or it's clear that they're their own business. So the other things to think about are, I would say the biggest thing is budget. It's a lot more expensive to have an employee. I can tell you that as a solo practitioner whose practice really has grown over the years, I still don't have employees. And I've been really on the fence in terms of my admin person, because that is arguably somebody that I'm really exercising control over what they do. They're operating solely to support my practice. They're billing me up by the hour, not by the job. I can really get in and micromanage the work. But everybody that I've used does hold themselves out as a business, does have other clients, and so on. So I feel like I have a defendable classification, which is important to me, particularly as an employment lawyer. I feel like I have some kind of moral obligation to to follow the law, basically, that I know like the back of my hand, those laws, at least, if nothing else, I should be following. Consider your budget. For me, it's just made more sense. Then I also have a lot of 1099s that are lawyers that I contract work out to, and those people I feel completely confident are truly contractors. So for me, it's worked to continue this model. I do think about changing it a lot, but I sort of like the flexibility that I get with the contractor. But I will say, for example, that I would never try and make our nanny a contractor. Nannies by definition are doing basically the parenting work. I mean, I don't know a single parent who's willing to turn over their work to a nanny and say, you can raise my kids however you want. So that is one thing I would definitely advise. I have kind of a specialty in domestic employment, and I always say your nanny is really an employee. So that's one thing on that. But, think about your costs. You're going to not only have all the costs of putting somebody on payroll and paying taxes, but you're going to have a fair amount of administrative costs of getting them started up. You also need to think about the fact that once someone becomes an employee, there's a change in your legal relationship with them. So, for example, if they claim, sexual harassment by a client, you could be on the hook for that. Whereas if they're a contractor, and assuming that classification stands, you're not on the hook, okay, in the same way that you would be if they're an employee. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say there.
Don't forget to advance.
Don't forget what?
Advance the slide.
Oh, thank you. And one last thing I would say on this is, another reason I think it makes sense to get employees is if you are growing and you only see your growth is going to be on an upward trajectory, then I think it does make sense. You might as well, because the margin on the costs obviously gets lower as you hire more employees. It's a lot more expensive for somebody who's only going to have one employee. The margin's much greater, obviously, than if you have 15 employees. And Angel, I think you're going to address this one, right?
Yes. So you've reached that point. You've made some decisions about who might be most appropriate to bring into your practice. At the point that you decide that you're going to be an employer as opposed to engaging with independent contractors, I'm going to sort of give a little bit more detail on some of the things that I mentioned earlier. Clearly, hiring practices, obviously you want to avoid asking questions in interviews about protected classes and beyond just those traditional protected classes that we all know, race, nationality, medical condition, and disability. There's also, you also need to think about pregnancy, family, marital status. We often want to know sort of an individual's ability to be available. Watch those questions because it can elicit information that, may provide the answer about marital status, family planning, pregnancy, but don't go further in engaging those questions. I mentioned earlier that I think it's really important to draft a job description. And if that's nothing more than you sitting down and bullet pointing what it is that you need this individual to do for your business, that's going to serve you in the long run, and also serve the individual and allow you to determine if they're the best fit and whether they're the best fit for you. And the reason that I highly suggest that is, one, you can use it for your job posting. You can use it for your interview. You can, if you specifically lay out what the qualifications you want for this job are, in your interview, you might also use that job description as a way to help you craft your interview questions, which I think you should also do. It will allow you to see if this person fits with when you sat down to think about this position, do they actually have the qualifications and the criteria that you set forth in that job description? It'll give you a sense of whether they are capable and qualified to do all the things you put in the job description. The other thing that it will help you with is performance management later on. You also already have a set list in this job description about what the expectations were for the position. So you'll have the opportunity once again to say, when I hired you, this is what I intended for you to do. This was my expectations, and you'll be able to keep an ongoing evaluation of whether or not that individual is satisfying your needs, and also whether or not your needs expand or contract as time goes on. In considering how to find the right candidate, it's very similar to the candidate trying to find a job. Utilize your network, social media. If you are a person that does a lot of networking, start asking questions at these events that you attend. Do you know someone that's looking for X? I'm looking for X. So you want to really go about the strategy the same way that an individual looks for a job. Craigslist, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot better resources for job postings if you go that route. A lot of times lawyers are able to find, appropriate folks within their network, but to the extent that you go beyond that, understand the quality of candidate that you're going to get for the way you post the position. If you take the position of not doing a job description, understand that you're not allowing this potential candidate to evaluate whether or not they have those classifications, right? So you can get a resume that may or may not fit what your needs are, but at every step you have a list in that job description that says, this is really what I'm looking for. This person does or does not have it. It can help you in evaluating resumes as well. Of course, everyone likes to ask for a cover letter. If you're not going to really read it, I'm not a fan of just asking for a cover letter to weed people out. I think you're better served by doing a good job description and letting people weed themselves out, understanding that you're going to come back to that specific criteria to determine their qualifications. And as you go through this process on the culture building, think about the things that you can or cannot provide in the way of compensation. If you can only provide an hourly compensation, or however you establish the compensation, think about how you can also provide perhaps low-cost benefits. If you're not in a position and the law does not require you to provide additional benefits beyond the compensation, then think about the ways that you can, utilize low-cost benefits or perks. Culture building is not just about building. It's not just about having benefits and perks. Whether or not you're intentional in building it, you're going to have it. You already have it as an individual in your business, and it goes to the issue of how you engage with your clients, how you engage with vendors, and how you engage with the public. And all those things are already informing the culture of your business. So you have the opportunity, as I said, and as I know Otis is going to build on sort of this continuous process evaluation. Take the opportunity to do your own performance evaluation in terms of whether you're meeting your intended mission, vision, and values for your business. And so at every step you have the opportunity to come back and keep improving on these aspects for long-term and short-term goals. So I'm going to turn it back over. We're going to get back into some additional compliance issues with Diana.
Okay, so these are sort of, this is sort of my list of the top 5 things. It's more like the top 10 things you want to do as an employer. By the way, I have all this on my website too, so you can feel free to go there. And my website's on various articles that are in your packet of materials. But these are some key things that you really should do. So you need to get an employer identification number if you're going to become an employer. You need to get workers' compensation insurance. If you are only looking at employing people in your home, sometimes your homeowner's insurance will have that. So that's a great thing to look at because it's usually a lot less expensive. I really recommend a wage and hour policy. If you're going to have anyone work for you who is not exempt, and most people who are going to work for you are not exempt, have a wage and hour policy. This is by far the biggest area that people get sued in as employers. And what happens is, two different people, two very different versions of events, the employer's version, the plaintiff's version. It's really helpful to be able to either put it in your filings or hand over to the DLSC your policy that clearly says that they must take their meal and rest breaks, that they've signed off on, that they're not allowed to work overtime without your permission, and so on. So I think having a meal and rest break policy and a policy regarding overtime is really, really key. And actually to make it an active, alive policy that people sign off on, that you refer to, that you maybe update once a year, that kind of a thing is really key. I think having a handbook is really key, mostly because of the policies that are contained within it. There are a number of things, policies, and statements you're required to give to your employees as an employer. One tip I'd give you here, and there's millions of resources like this, but one that I like to use for clients just because it saves them a lot of money is the California Chamber of Commerce. They have an employee handbook that's all of maybe $200. I use that for my clients a lot as a template, saving them probably 5 or 6 hours of attorney's fees. And you customize it before you even start working with it. So you can say, I have this many employees, I want to have this kind of leave, I want to have, there's endless ways to customize it before it even spits out the policy that then I usually go and look at and spend an hour or two of my time on instead of 10 hours of my time. Similarly, a place like the Chamber of Commerce has these big posters that you want to have in your workplace that have all the required postings. The nice thing about using something like the Chamber of Commerce is that at a $200 investment, it's not such a big deal that you've got to, what I would suggest doing is updating it every year. And the Chamber of Commerce does that for you. And again, so you hire an attorney for an hour or two to look over the handbook that you've updated. But the Chamber of Commerce does for you all the updating of new leave laws and things like that, or ways that the leave laws change. Similarly with the postings, what you have to post changes all the time as new laws are passed. So I personally think it's a great resource as long as you get you invest in a little bit of an employment attorney's time to kind of review it and make sure it makes sense for you and what your needs are. And I would add to sort of that top 5 list postings. You do need to have postings in the workplace, and consider not only the California postings, but county postings. So, for example, those of you who are in San Francisco, we have a mandatory sick leave policy now that you have to give people paid sick time. You have to give them money to go towards health insurance or give them health insurance. That's Healthy San Francisco. And I think both those things need to be posted. I know that the paid sick leave law does. So think about what are the requirements of posting, and think about where you're going to get that from. Again, it doesn't need to be from an attorney, but I would get attorney weigh in on it. Going to the next slide. One other thing, too, I think a great place to kind of lay down some of the culture that Angel was talking about, and also to put in some key provisions, is to have an offer letter that will essentially function like an employment contract, right? So you put in the terms, that, how long what the employee is going to make, what they're going to do. I really think this is a key place to put your at-will language. I also personally like to have at-will language in the handbook, and I personally like to have a separate sign-off sheet for it because it's such important language. I do the same thing, for example, with a sexual harassment policy. That's such important. It's so important that your employees saw that and that they read it, they understand it, they are buying into it. So there's certain things I like to really call out. At-will language is one of them, and a great place to do that is in your offer letter. So kind of key things that you want to establish right at the outset of the relationship can go in your offer letter, as well as key legal language that you want to put in there. So one of the things that I would say, of course, partially out of self-interest, is that you want to, if you're going to become an employer, you want to have an employment attorney lined up. Obviously, you're going to also need some other kinds of attorneys, like I think having a corporate attorney or someone who's going to advise you on what your structure is going to be. for example, if you're getting your business started. But I think once you become an employer, it is really important to have an employment attorney. And as Angel says, don't just call when there's a problem. It's and it's the whole pound of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Lawyers are expensive, but on the other hand, if you get a couple of well-placed policies in place, you really save yourself a lot of money down the road, and more importantly, a lot of heartache. So I would say, vet some attorneys ahead of time, vet an employment attorney, get a good relationship with one, and then have that person, if you're a small business, you're going to really be thinking about costs, and have that person give you a priority list. That's what I usually do for my smaller clients, is I say, these are the 5 things I think you can't do without, and out of those, here's the one thing I think will take a fair amount of time, and here's how we can sort of break it down. For example, one thing that I often say to new employers is really look at your exemptions. I think this also falls under the area of wage and hour law, but that is, again, one of these top things that employers get sued over again and again. Very knowledgeable employers, even attorneys, think that if someone's on a salary basis that they're exempt, or that if the title of an exemption fits for them, they're exempt. It's a really detailed test, and they need to be doing the exempting activities 50% of the time or more in California. And pretty soon, I think that's going to be federal law as well. So it's really important to make sure you've got that right. And you can work with it if you don't have exempt employees, but what you can't work with is if you misclassified somebody and then you owe them $100,000 in back wages. That could be enough to put an employer out of business. So think about getting somebody ahead of time to go through what you have and what your needs are and what are the top few things you want to invest in. Of course, consider local requirements. Like we said, paid sick leave. There's a different minimum wage in San Francisco than there is for a lot of the state. So those are things to think about. I'd also say, and then we talked about postings, but I'd also say, and this is just my bias doing privacy law, but one thing I don't see enough employers think about is privacy in the workplace, especially as a new employer. You're going to have more people in your workplace. You're going to be getting access to highly confidential information that you're going to have a duty to protect. So think about basic things. Do you have a locked cabinet? Do you have, I went around, till I got my privacy certification, I walked around without a password on my laptop. I look at that now and I think, what was I thinking? I have a lot of really valuable information in there, but I just didn't really think about it. So things like that, you want to, and as you get more sophisticated, obviously your systems are going to need to get more sophisticated, but think about basic things. How are you protecting the information of your employees, and how are you protecting your company's information from your employees? Are you having them sign, confidentiality agreements? Are you thinking about, who is going to get access to this information, particularly the very confidential information? I think that's all I've got.
I just kind of thought of one thing on the postings that I wanted to ask, and this is sort of the continuous process, improvement and evaluation. As most of you know, different postings are applicable depending on how many employees you have. And so the key numbers are usually 5, 15, 20, and 50 in terms of what specific postings will be applicable to your business. And you can go to the EDD website, and it'll actually give you more specific information on what postings are appropriate given the size of your company. And you should check both local, state, and federal compliance. That is something that changes continually. That's an area you're going to want to evaluate on a regular basis, or just engage an attorney to have you stay updated on changes in the law, especially here in San Francisco. There's a new the Fair Chance Ordinance going into effect April 13th. That's for employers over 20, but that's sort of an example of just how quickly things are changing. The minimum wage for San Francisco is $10.74 currently. That changes pretty frequently too, so just either engage someone that will keep you up to date, or set quarterly half-year, yearly evaluation of your policies and procedures.
Can I interrupt for just one sec? I just wanted to say, too, I meant to say this at the beginning, but Angel talked about hiring, and Otis is going to talk about it more. In terms of the legalities of hiring, there's also an article in your packet on that. So it might be, and it's a quick read, might be worth looking at.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about handling payroll and benefits. I talked about it a little bit, but to go into it more specifically, thank you. To talk about it more specifically, payroll is one of those things that you can do in-house, but you want to make sure that you're compliant with pay stub and pay period requirements. You can take a look at Labor Code 226. That'll give you some guidance on both pay stub and payday compliance. There are very specific things that need to be on a pay stub, and if they are not, you can be penalized for that. And you want to make sure that you have all of your local, state, and federal withholdings being appropriately calculated. So a lot of folks use QuickBooks and other types of in-house bookkeeping and payroll applications. That's another risk that you take in your business in terms of saving costs. In terms of benefits, if you offer benefits to your employees, you want to make sure that things like sick leave and paid time off are being appropriately calculated on the pay stubs and being kept up to date. The other thing that you want to do, we're sort of giving you the very nuts and bolts. There's a lot more to it. You want to make sure you're complying with the Wage and Theft Protection Act. It's a notice that you basically need to give to any employee that you hire, which sort of designates this is your rate of pay, this is what your job is. And there's a form, again, that you can get. I believe that one is at the Department of Industrial Relations, the DIR. That basically is a notice that you can fill out and make sure that you give that to your employee so that that's all clear. So again, that's an area that's continuing to grow. The other thing that you need to do is report to the new employee registry, and you can, I think, you need to fill that out within 20 days of employing an individual and make sure that you comply with that. The purpose of that looks like, they want to know who your employees are, but believe it or not, it arises out of child support. There's a law passed under Bill Clinton that basically requires you to report who your employees are as you hire them. You can imagine, but though, that also gives information on whether or not people are being appropriately taxed and withholdings are being made as well. So those are just a couple of other things to make sure that are compliant. And those are issues that you'll need to be very specific about if you decide to deal with payroll and benefits in-house. On the other hand, if you decide to outsource those things, hiring a business accountant or bookkeeper, that's an independent contractor. A lot of these similar things that we talked about today, you should also be looking at as you deal with independent contractors and other businesses to handle, things such as business accounting and bookkeeping. I recently had a client tell me that their bookkeeper was still paying their employees on a 1099. These individuals were clearly employees. So that was obviously an accountant that needed to be fired. So all of these are things that, you'll need it for hiring an employee, but you might also need it to evaluate the qualifications of the vendors that you work with to make sure that they're properly serving your business. Other options in terms of dealing with payroll and benefits, of course, for large-scale companies such as Intuit, ADP, and TriNet. These companies are sort of one-stop shopping for your payroll and benefits. They'll certainly make sure that all your pay stubs are compliant, proper withholdings are are being taken. In the case of ADP and TriNet, they also offer HR compliance as well, and you can certainly, I'm not endorsing any of these companies, I'm just sharing them as sources to consider as you make your decisions about these things. But ADP and TriNet are companies that can also offer HR advising and compliance for you at a cost, of course. And you'll just need to decide whether it makes sense for you to engage a company of that size. As a small company, you may not need to do that. My approach on things like handbooks, which TriNet and ADP also work on, I believe that the handbook itself, everything that you produce on behalf of your company, advances that mission, vision, and values. It serves to support building your company culture. You can have a handbook that is cut and paste, or you can just engage someone that has some sense of your business, is learning about your business. I take it upon myself as to be sort of a non-traditional lawyer and engage to find out more about my clients' businesses so that the handbook is tailored specifically to their business and not just a template. But those are costs, again, that you'll need to consider what makes sense for you. And if you're just in it for the short term, maybe it makes sense to just go get a template. But if you're really trying to build something that you're not, if you're trying to build something that you can say, hey, this distinguishes my business from someone else, you might take that time to do a handbook that looks different than a template. At a minimum with my clients, I get them to write sort of an introductory welcome to the company statement, which also includes the at-will provisions. But again, that's just different approaches. I really try to be more forward-thinking so that my handbooks are perhaps something that my clients can grow into. But aside from that, you might just have specific policies that you put in place as opposed to having a full handbook. So I just mentioned that because, again, companies like ADP and TriNet can offer those sort of one-stop shopping on handbooks and other policies that you may need. There's a lot of startup options coming forward. I work with a number of startups here in the Bay Area, and some of the companies, a couple of the companies that they've mentioned to me that they work with the Zen Payroll. I did go onto their site and sort of check out what it is. It looks like a pretty cost efficient approach for your business. I think there's sort of a flat rate for enrollment, and then I think it's some amount that's on a per person basis in terms of payroll. One of the things that I liked about that system was that they do have it so that you can do it virtually, so that when you need to do payroll, you can just sort of plug it into their app and send that stuff along, and they'll make sure that it gets paid. I'm not sure to what extent ADP and TriNet offer those sort of basic, I'm on the beach, but I got to pay my employee type options, but you can certainly check that out. Zenefits is a company that offers, and those companies, my understanding is that they're separate, but Zenefits they're one of these disrupting companies that does payroll as well as benefits as well as HR compliance. So they're sort of attempting to compete with ADP and TriNet. And again, I don't endorse any of these companies. I'm just sharing them with you as potential resources for your payroll and benefits administration. So Diana and I have provided our information for you in terms of our law practice emails. I'm on Twitter at Angel Lewis ESQ. She's on Twitter as well at Diana Mayer Law. She provides updates on becoming an employer, terminating employees, and the intersection of employment and privacy. Mine are my Twitter updates and articles are very much in the employment law, HR, and entrepreneur space. I really think about employment from the perspective of not what it is right now, but what it will be in the future. There's a lot of contingency employment going on. And just being able to think about your business, one, again, not just from the point of view of compliance, but also how you can, how you can strategize for your business to achieve, the greatest productivity and engagement from your employees. And Otis is now going to give us a case study on his own hiring practices, and I think that it will sort of merge both the legal compliance piece as well as sort of the practical law practice management.
And before he starts, I know people will have questions for Angel and Diana. We're going to do all the questions after Otis has said his piece, so thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Thanks. My name is Otis Landerholm. I'm an immigration lawyer. I fight for immigrants who are hoping to stay in this country. And the point of my piece in this is really to share why, at least I think, that hiring is valuable, why it's helpful, why I recommend it, why it's worked for me at least. Before we get too far into it, I'd love to take the little audience poll again and ask you to raise your hand one more time, but this time if you are the decision maker that has the power to hire someone. Okay, raise your hand if you've hired that person or if you've hired someone again. Okay. So earlier there were quite a few people that raised their hands that had actually hired someone. If you've hired somebody at all in your life, raise your hand one more time. Sorry. Okay, so quite a few of you. Raise your hand again if you've fired someone. Okay. The dark side of the hiring process. Raise your hand, last question, if you've ever hired an attorney. Okay, a couple. Okay, all right, cool. So I'll show my, even before I even say anything else, I am no expert whatsoever, right? I opened my firm in January of 2011. My first year I was 100% solo. My second year I hired my first part-time admin assistant. It was working. I later hired a paralegal. It was working. I hired an attorney, right? We grew our office. Then I opened a second office in downtown Oakland just in January of this year, right? I hired 3 new staff members. I now have 1 attorney, 2 paralegals, and 2 admin. So we're a small team, right? But we're growing, and there's no perfect firm, and it's not a utopia, but we are trying to get, we're trying to go somewhere, and it seems to be going somewhere where I want it to be going. All right. So let me see how this clicker works. There we go. So this is my team, and so for whatever that's worth. This is what I want to talk about as far as. So this is what I want to say as far as what I think every one of you already has in your law firm, whether you know it or not, okay? And every one of these roles might look exactly like you, and every one of these roles might be, you and, your dog, whatever. Everybody needs somebody to answer the phone. Everybody needs somebody to write a client a letter saying, thank you for coming in and meeting with me, right? Everybody needs somebody to get basic work done. Everybody needs somebody to take care of the bills, right? If you don't send out invoices, your business is not going to be in business very long. Everybody needs somebody to actually show up in court, right? And on down the list. Everybody needs somebody to actually market, rainmake, bring in work, right? So the point of showing this is to think about, the tasks that your office needs to accomplish are already getting accomplished. The question is, who is doing them? And how valuable is it to you if it's you that the one that has to do them? And how valuable could it be if your time was allocated to something maybe more profitable to you, or maybe that was something you enjoyed doing more, and that's really the question. So the other thing I want to talk about, after you hire somebody, and I might jump around and you can interrupt me as we go forward. I'm a bit informal like that. Hiring somebody is the first step, and it is the easy part, right? What I recommend is, take Angel or take Diana out to a cup of coffee and get to know them, and then hire them to take care of all of your HR crap, right? and make sure you're in compliance, and then hire the person with the beautifully drafted offer letter and the handbook and everything else. And then you have to manage that person. Then you have to train that person. Then you have to actually have a relationship with that person on a day-to-day basis. And that is a lot more complicated, than just the initial phase, right? And so the trick to management, from my perspective, is to be very, very clear, to do exactly what Angel was talking about, have a clearly defined job description for exactly what you want that person to do, clearly written expectations, samples, templates, policies, procedures, goals, deadlines, so that the person you're hiring knows what to do, right? I am now going to, you're going to think I'm a little nuts, but I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell. Okay. This binder, I'll just hold it up right here, is my office's Policies and Procedures binder, okay? I did not write a single thing in it. My staff did, right? It has our internal policies, everything that we all have to be on the same page about, what we tell clients if they call after hours, right? What we tell clients if they're in an emergency, right? It talks about how to schedule a phone appointment with my office. It talks about how to send a fax out of my office. It talks about how to calendar a new potential client's appointment on my calendar. And the point of it is, and really, I didn't write a thing, but when you're training somebody who's new, and this is the idea I want to give you, when you're training somebody who's new in your office, only you know how you want it done, right? So tell that person exactly how you want it done, step by step, fairly simple instructions, and say, okay, write it down so that if you're ever sick, right, if you ever leave, the next person can come in and do your job without making me stand over their shoulder and explain how to send a fax, right? And there's value in that. There's value in that because otherwise it's taking up your time to manage people. You don't want your time to be spent managing people. You want it to be spent in the courtroom or otherwise doing something valuable. All right. More on management. So what I say is, first of all, you've got to train everybody, and that's really the idea of meeting with people, telling them what you want, and having them write it down in their own words so that it makes sense to them, what it is you expect. The second thing that we only recently in my office started implementing, and now that we've been implementing, it really is working, is what we call our daily check-in. So what we do every morning, 9 a.m. to 9:15, we check in. It doesn't take more than 15 minutes. We go around the table and we say, what did we get done yesterday, and what are we getting done in the next 8 hours, right? We only have 8 hours a day. Let's get everybody clear. And if I hear that one of my staff members really doesn't have that much on their to-do list that day, I say, fantastic. Here's 3 more things that I could use your help with, right? And having that, that cuts down on, I hate to have individual meetings with every single staff person to say, hey, didn't this get done? Didn't that get done? If you do it in a group, one, it creates this sort of team culture that I think is valuable, and 2, there's no sort of individualized pressure on anybody. You just go around the room. And for the people who are out here that have partners, right, I would recommend you do this. It doesn't have to be employees. You could do this with your partners. You can say, hey, we want to be productive today. What are you going to get done in the next 8 hours? Oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this. How about you? Okay, great. And then you sit down, you've got your list, and you go, right? Anyway, that's... Okay, the third thing in here are what I call the weekly praises. I want my staff to feel like I appreciate their work, because I do, right? And because I appreciate their work, I actually try to make it a point. Fridays is our sort of structured meeting time as an office to deal with more than just what's going on today. We deal with, anyway, new cases that have come in that week and other issues. But on Fridays, I also like to tell people, hey, I really appreciated that you took the time to do, to finish up something a little bit late last night, or, whatever it is. If there's some kind of compliment that I can give, I do it on a weekly basis, and I do it at that Friday meeting. The negative things that I do one-on-one, and I do them in the monthly reviews, unless it's more urgent than that, okay? So I do try to be organized and have it on the calendar every month, a staff employment review, right? Just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and also to check in and see how the individual feels about working for me. There's this article that I read that sort of changed, I don't know anything about management, right? But there's an article, you could Google it, it's called The 1 Minute Manager, and it gave me all kinds of brilliant ideas for how to manage people in a short amount of time and in an effective way where you're not having to basically stand over somebody's shoulder. And I really recommend it. You can Google it, and it's worth reading. And then the sixth thing that I mentioned on this slide is it's important to manage tasks and deadlines. In my office, we use a software product. It's called Clio. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. There's lots of different products out there, Rocket Matter, Firm Manager by LexisNexis, whatever you use, whatever system you have in place to make sure that things get done and to assign tasks to different cases and things like that. It's important to have an infrastructure in place so that you can say, hey, wait a second, this case had a task that was due yesterday, and it's not done. What the hell happened? And then we can go back and figure out what went on, right? And if it was something urgent, then somebody can get the axe. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, all right. So, all right. Yes, everybody wants to grow their firm, but you have to have I would say be cautious about how you grow your firm. Be conscientious. Have your finances always in the back of your mind, because you are the only person that's keeping your doors open. And I would say watch for your return on the investment. You don't want to hire someone and lose money from it, right? It is expensive to pay for the expert to draft all your employee hiring documents. It's expensive to post that ad wherever you're posting it. It's expensive in terms of time to do all the stupid interviews and to review all the stupid resumes and blah, 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 until you find the person that you want to give the offer to. In order to make sure all of that investment of capital, time and money, is worth it, you have to make sure that the person you've hired is being productive for you. And if they're not, if it's out of balance, you've got to let that person go. And it's not me being mean. It's the reality of you want to keep your doors open. And it's not an important thing for you. It's important for your clients. Because if you have somebody that's not productive, it's going to drag your team down. All right. The idea is, the rule of thumb is, you don't want them to just pay for themselves because there's overhead associated with having that person in their space. You want them to pay for themselves and their overhead, and then have a profit margin on top of that. And that's why they say there's a rule of thumb of 3 to 1. All right? Which means if you're hiring a paralegal, right? I'm not a mathematician. If you're hiring a paralegal you're paying them $20 an hour, say, right? If you're billing the paralegal at maybe $150 an hour to the client, right? You can calculate how expensive that paralegal is depending on how many hours a week they work. You can calculate how expensive that paralegal is on a monthly basis, and you can calculate through your software system, whatever, how many hours that paralegal billed on a monthly basis. And you can do the math, and if there's not a 3 times return on investment, you need to have a conversation with the paralegal. And it's as simple as that. Does that make sense? And it doesn't have to be a bad conversation. It could be like, look, whoa, look, what happened here? And they'll say, oh man, I was really distracted this week. There was something going on in my personal life. Okay, let's figure that out and let's get you back on track. And, for me, I know that I need to have my paralegal billing about 30 hours a week, right? And we're tracking that. We're monitoring it. And he's a great guy and he's doing great. And so, anyway, the point is to actually step into your boss pants and to actually take control over what your employees are and aren't doing. And I will say it's actually quite simple to calculate for paralegals. It's much more difficult to calculate for secretaries and for administrative staff because they're not tracking their billable time in the same way. But if they are good, you will have a sense for whether or not they are really providing value, not to you, but to your clients. All right. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is what I call the time value index.
And Otis, I'm just going to ask you to get through
Speed
this
up.
so we can get to the questions.
Love it, thank you.
These numbers are intriguing, so we need to hear about them.
Yes, absolutely. And this is my last slide, so we're right on. So does anybody know what the number 168 stands for? All right, I'll just... You say it again? Hours in a week. That's exactly it. There are 7 hours a day. There are 24 hours a day. There are 7 days in a week. 7 times 24 is 168. The question is, how valuable are the hours that you are doing on a weekly basis? And if all of your hours are spent wearing the receptionist hat, answering the phone and taking messages, then that's not bringing in a lot of revenue for your firm. Whereas if most of those hours are spent, in the courtroom, that's highly valuable time. What's 48?
The weekend?
48 is what I call the number of productive weeks in a year. In any given year, you have 2 weeks that you're automatically going to take off for Christmas or the holidays, and you have 2 other weeks that are basically going to disappear because life will happen to you. And so you think about, the point of this exercise is to think about the number of productive hours in a week, to think about the number of productive weeks in a year, and then of course, what is 78.7? 78.7 is the scary one. 78.7 is what a Google search turned back to me as the average life expectancy for each of us. Yeah? So the idea is the number of productive hours in a week, number of productive hours in a year, and the number of productive years in your life. And the question is, do you want to be the person licking the stamps and answering the phone calls, or do you want to be really providing the extra value to your clients? And if you want it the other way, delegate the tasks that you don't want to be doing, delegate the tasks that are less valuable to your clients, and hire somebody. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Otis and Angel and Diana. And now we'll open it up to questions. Because they're doing the recording and the webcast, I will have to repeat the questions before we get an answer. We can start over here. Thanks.
What does the panel think about using one of those agencies that provides you with either full-time or part-time employees, and they take on all the burdens of payroll, et cetera, et cetera? Pros, cons?
So the question is, what does the panel think about agencies that basically provide staff and take on the payroll and HR and back office issues?
I'll answer. To begin, it's a temping agency. It's a staffing agency. They go by lots of different names. Did you need to clarify? So again, it comes down to cost. It's whether you deal with those issues in-house or outsource that individual. So again, you have to consider that they're going to charge you not just for what they're paying them, but a fee that's going to go to the company. You need to consider whether or not that individual is going to be able to meet those expectations that you have when we talked about the job description and all of that. So again, it just comes down to being able to control the means and manner of production, right? So if you want to give the control over payroll, administrative things, it's not just as someone showing up. For some jobs that might be appropriate as a receptionist, perhaps a secretary, but you need to think about in terms of bringing in someone else that you need to have more individualized and specific knowledge about your business. They may not be able to satisfy all those things. So it's a question of cost and also just meeting your own expectations.
I would say, I think it can be a nice hybrid solution for you. You avoid some of the risk of keeping someone a contractor without all of the costs of having employees. Although, as Angel said, you will obviously pay for the service itself. I would say that what you should have in your contract with them should be some kind of indemnification, so that if you were sued, because you could be considered a joint employer with them, so you want to have something in your contract that says if they sued you, say, for not paying them overtime, for example, you want to have something that says the temp agency is their employer and they indemnify you for that, because that's a large part of the value that you should be paying for is not having to deal with that risk.
Great, thanks. Do we have other questions? Sure.
To this comment, I presume that as an immigration practitioner and seeing the picture of your staff, could you comment on any special challenges of conducting a bilingual practice in terms of your advertising?
Oh, man. Let's go grab a cup of coffee, talk about it. So I'm actually trilingual. I speak Spanish and Mandarin Chinese, and so we market to both of those communities. As far as marketing goes, get to know people that are in the community. I'm out at different churches. I'm meeting with different people that are, organizing in those communities. And just, I don't know. Do you have anything specific that you mean, did you mean like advertising looking for staff from those communities, or?
No, I mean just the day-to-day operation of your staff and their communications with clients.
Yeah, we would have to, let's grab a cup of coffee and maybe there is something that I could shed some light on there. We definitely do everything in multiple languages. So.
There's another question in the back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay. Most of my questions deal more with like strategic hiring as opposed to like the legal background on it at this point. So for me, for example, I'm a solo. I'm still trying to figure out like valuing, let's say it's like, okay, order of priorities seems like it'd be like, secretary or legal assistant as like the top need, and then doing contract work out to like, attorneys and side. So I guess the question I have is, just in terms of budgeting and trying to figure out like what I ought to pay a legal secretary, whether it should be, I'd rather do it on a contract basis is my thinking right now. Like what percentage of your like gross you should be like dedicating to this. It's harder, it seems like you can't really do a calculation the same way that, as you were kind of mentioning, just like about trying to like triple it, okay, I'm gonna pay this much and it's gonna be this much, as far as billables. So I'm still sort of trying to resolve that. I wonder if you guys can maybe speak to that a little bit. Maybe that's too big of a...
I could maybe respond with a story if you wanted a story. So I was solo my first year out, and the February of my second year, I decided to hire a part-time secretary, and I decided to contract out my phones. Because what I was finding is I'd be in court and my phone would ring and I couldn't answer it and I'd lose the call. Or I'd be in with a client and the phone would ring and I couldn't answer it and I'd lose the call, right? And so what I did is I actually contracted out to a reception service my phones, and at the same time I hired a secretary. When I did both of those things in February of 2012, my take-home income doubled, okay? And so I learned something from that, and it was a powerful lesson, and I haven't looked back since.
So I guess the question coming from that is, one question I have is, so I've been doing the same thing in terms of I have like a part-time intern, and I have like an outside service that does my phones. And so I guess one question I have is, did you feel like it was better to, why not have the secretary answering your phones full time and being a secretary, maybe have somebody in the office? I don't know. And again, maybe it's better just like have a side conversation. I don't want to jeopardize the whole.
So this gets back to the thinking like an entrepreneur, right? So the way a lot of businesses start today is they bring people in who want to work. Hey, guess what? You find someone within this job description that you've put together. Don't put them in the box. Create the box. Get rid of the box. Bring in someone who wants to work. And if that means that you want to perhaps have administrative tasks versus legal tasks, you can divide it in that way. Who is someone that I can bring in to handle legal tasks? Identify what the nature of those legal tasks are. Allow that to inform your job description if you want to focus on legal tasks. On the administrative side, again, what are those administrative tasks that you want to do? Allow that to inform your job description, right? So we know lots of people that are entrepreneurs of companies who don't have titles. There's nothing wrong with creating a title for how you've divided those administrative tasks versus those legal tasks. I also know a number of attorneys that were able to, leverage their law practices by bringing in an individual who graduated from law school but was not a licensed attorney. I can't recall the title that person had, but ultimately it doesn't matter. If you've identified the tasks that you need that person to perform, they're willing to perform the job, you determine whether they're qualified to perform those things, you can create whatever that is. So I would just stress not to feel like you need to be hiring people to fit within specific titles, but to identify the tasks that you need performed for the job that you need to get done.
And I have an idea for figuring out what those tasks are. The way to do it is to look at where you are spending your time every day. If you literally tracked what you did every single day for 2 weeks, you would have a list of this, all of the time that you spent licking envelopes and all of the time that you spent standing in line at FedEx or whatever. All of that stuff is stuff that needs to go in your job description.
There's two other things I would add to that, which is one thing I ask myself a lot is how much do I enjoy this activity? So if I hate doing it, like I hate admin work, and it also happens that it grosses a lot less for me than my billable hour, but it really, the hours are fungible, right? So the reason I delegate it out is because I don't want to spend my time doing it. I would also say that the more you're going to use someone, the more I think it makes sense to make an infrastructure investment, like have them come in. And thirdly, I think a really great resource for you would be, are you on the Solo Small listserv?
I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I love things. I love listservs for that kind of thing. Like, here's what I've got. What are you all doing? And then you'll get 15 ideas, and it's a great way to just see what other people are doing and get some really good ideas to see what's working for people.
I've actually got a quick question, which is, how do you guys counsel your clients in terms of employment practices liability insurance? Is it important?
I think it's important, but very few people have it, and I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because it's expensive. I think when you're solo or a really small firm, it probably doesn't make as much sense for the costs, but I think it would depend on the policy and what the costs are, but I think it's a great thing to have. You still have to not be negligent, so that's my other guess, is that some people only find it so helpful.
On the issue of employment insurance, small companies, generally the cost benefit for them doesn't really measure up to the need for it. You can do your own sort of cost benefit analysis on the insurance. The challenges are, as with all insurance, understanding what the exceptions are, understanding the scope of what's covered and what's not. It seems that frequently they are far more limited than the companies think they are. And so you're also getting into situations where you're going to have to employ the issue of, is this particular activity that's or alleged misconduct, is it actually going to be covered by this policy? So it's like every other insurance, do your cost benefit analysis. Most small companies are not, from what I can tell, not getting the insurance, but that's certainly something to think about for your long-term business strategy.
Did we have any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Well, first I wanted to thank you guys for a wonderful presentation, really helpful. And I especially loved Otis's information. I'm an immigration attorney myself, and it looks like I'm on the same track.
Cool.
I mainly work with Russian-speaking clients.
Cool.
So I wanted to ask you, when you switched to the reception service, this is what I'm struggling with right now. Did you use someone who speaks several languages as well, or was it just people who speak English? And second, you mentioned that you bill your paralegal hourly, while I personally do everything on a flat fee basis. So how does it work for you?
All right, so this is going to lead to an interesting and more complex conversation. I bill all my clients flat fees, but I track hours. Okay, and so my flat fee corresponds to how long I know the average asylum case takes my paralegal, my attorney, my admin staff. You have to cost out every service that you're providing to figure out really what you should charge your clients, right? So that's the second piece of what you said. The first piece is my reception service is bilingual English and Spanish. And they know that if they have a client that needs to speak with me, who I speak Chinese, if they have a Chinese-speaking client, they'll put them directly through to a specific voicemail that I set up in Mandarin. And they know I also have someone who speaks Russian on my team. And they know that if anybody speaks Russian, they're going directly to David, my Russian speaker. And so, yeah, there are reception services out there that are ahead of the game with language. And you can find them. The one I use is called Reliable Receptionist. They're in Walnut Creek. They're great. I go out there, and they're nice in a small shop. One, I don't think that they have. I know that they don't have Russian language capabilities, but larger ones. The largest one that I know of is called Ruby's Receptionist, and I bet you, they have Russian options. Yep.
All right. Well, seeing no further hands, I want to just thank the panel very much for the excellent presentation today, and we'll call it adjourned.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.